This is part 2 of a series. Last week we talked about the situation of outsourcing. This week we want to go into a bit more details about what. So we are 𝘥𝘰𝘺𝘵𝗵𝗵𝗫. We exist for 5 years. We are a venture builder, meaning we partner up with people that want to develop a product and build at the same time the company. We are working in embedded and IoT sector. And if you have any questions about this webinar, about topics that you want me to go in, just drop them into the chat and we will read and we will answer. So we are working from Stuttgart into the CEE, and there's a bit of a question why we pivoted and why we are now working with the CEE and especially with Romania. And that will be the topic also a bit for today. So let's recap a bit more. And that is also our only ask. So Dan and me, we have partnered up and we've seen this huge tech community, over 200,000 people in Romania. And we have seen growth after growth for like 15 years now. Every year more people were hired. Now what we are seeing is that people are getting benched. For the last 2 years in a lot of development centers, in a lot of agencies, in a lot of talks around the cities, people said that yes, there are now less projects, people are getting benched. So if you're seeing this and if you're feeling this, that's our only ask. You need to be ready for this plan D. So what happens if projects are not coming? What happens if things turn for the bad? So that is our idea about this plan D. A, B, and C is more about, like finding the next job, finding the next opportunity. D would be building your own opportunity. So let's dive in from the last time. We talked about those 15 years. Early outsourcing started in the 2000s. The CEE was like this alternative of good engineers for better prices than the high prices you pay in Britain, in France, in Germany. And it also corresponds with Jira, the ability to ticket a project, lead immediately to this idea that, hey, you can now not have everybody in the same room. The golden years was like this decade of strong growth. In Romania, especially, the community became the largest in the country. If you look at Poland, for example, they also had their golden years, but at the time they are building strong international Polish companies that now are on a shopping spree in Germany. And then we have peak outsourcing in around 20. And we have this maturing now. At this point, we clearly see the development centers becoming mature. They're becoming like almost equal to the company's headquarters. We see also the players getting a playbook. So that means that if you contract people in Romania, everybody knew how to do that. What is interesting is at this heated moment, the COVID surge came in and there was a hiring frenzy all over the world and also felt in the CEE. A lot of people started to really get, from the pricing point of view, equality to German prices, British prices. The only one that still was far ahead was the US. And then we saw for the last 2 years a turning point where roughly a third of the community that is in tech in Romania is now faced with unemployment, huge layoffs. For example, one of the big ones is Conti, 20 years in Timișoara, and now reduced to 0. And we see this pivot and 3 scenarios coming up. We can either see a pivot in this environment that we see new companies emerging. We can see that the community is contracting, or that there's even a structural decline, even maybe collapse. So if we have a look at that for the scenarios, and that is a conclusion from last time, the managed contraction for developers leads managers and founders. Fewer jobs, more competition. Managers will be much more cost-focused, much less promotions. So the abilities to get and retain talent is reduced by the managers. And for the founders and early teams, they are losing now this ability to have fast and easy outsourcing contracts. So they now have to learn much more, much earlier, and they cannot fall back on the talents that exists in countries like Poland or Hungary. Then for a developer in a company, it means that we are not looking at 1/3 jobs lost, we are looking at like 50% of jobs lost. And if you think about that, we have 4 big cities in Romania, and you have tens of thousands of people working in tech. So if they get laid off, which industry will absorb them? This will be having a huge impact on the city centers. Less people going for dining, less people throwing an office party. So for the developers, the realistic chance to get a promotion, to raise the income, is to leave Romania. And the diaspora in Romania is already 1/5 of the population, so that would be a huge brain drain. Problem here, the opportunities to leave Romania, to go to other places, are now limited in this classical sense of going to Germany, going to America. Just on a note, a couple of months ago in late summer, I had a friend and he wanted to go to Germany to find better job opportunities. He went to Germany, he ran out of money. He couldn't find a job because there were no jobs in that region in Germany for tech. So he's a highly sophisticated developer. He's now working at McDonald's to pay for the rent. If you immigrate, you have to immigrate to Southeast Asia, you need to immigrate to Dubai, maybe to Bulgaria to keep the cost down, but it needs to be figured out. There's no easy default now, go to the US and do something. For tech leads and managers of competence centers, of development centers, of outsourcing centers, 90% of the companies in Romania, they are now firefighting. So at that point, there is no development anymore. As there is this complete collapse, it means that the strategic bond between them and the company is broken. So there was this huge psychological shock for the people of 𝗏𝘶𝘂 when they got the notice that the whole department that has been built up for 20 years is cancelled and deleted. So there's politics, there is exits, and for the founders and early start teams, you would say like, okay, there's more talent, but at the same time, there is not a community left. The cities will be overwhelmed. So the startup community that needs to be forming around them to get them into any meaningful way, to connect them, to have them, to support them, also collapses. And you can see this in East Germany, for example, with the exception of Berlin. There is no founder-led city in East Germany because the community is so broken apart. So the strategic pivot that we're discussing today is about this idea that the companies will develop product exploration abilities. And at that point, the decline stops at a certain point and people are absorbed. And last time we talked about Poland as a very great example, Krakow region, they absorbed the reduction of outsourcing jobs and got them into established SMEs or new startups. For sure, for the individual developer, the lookout was that his income was reduced, but he didn't lose a job. And now he is in a new company and he can now grow and maybe recover over the next decade his income. And there's this thing where in Romania, when I talk to the people, most of them are thinking this is like a policy problem, a politics problem. A lot of people like to talk about Bucharest and the policies coming out of that. But in a nutshell, it's empty offices in England, France, Italy, Spain, and Germany that should be having you worried. And that is also a bit of the answer that we have. Is this just a downturn? Maybe the first downturn, but for sure a downturn? Or is this a strategic pivot in a contraction, forcing the people really to rethink? And I went through 3 downsides in the last 15 years. So I know slowdowns, I know hiring freezes, but I went today. That is a picture of the office complex in Stuttgart. This is one of the premium office places, and roughly 2,000 people should be working there, hundreds of companies, most of them having connections to Romanian competence center, development centers, outsourcing partners. And as I went into the building, that is a big mall and food place for those offices, centralized, and you can see 12 o'clock, the food place is completely shut down, and that is not a temporary thing, that is something that is ongoing. And I went to the first street, so this is Main Street, this is prime real estate, this is a big office building, you can see still cars, and that is an analysis on the letterboxes. Half of the place is already empty. So this is when I talk about like people telling me, hey, I have a black book, I have connections, I know people, I will get projects. Like, yeah, on the other side of that phone call, nobody will pick up because there is nobody left. And that is now picture from today. Where I'm situated in Stuttgart, there are supposed to be 1,000 companies doing technology. 700 letterboxes at least 4 years, 5 years ago. And now there are less than 100. So this huge contraction in Germany is emblematic for the problems that is being faced in CEE, and especially in Romania, as Romania is so much more dependent on outside project allocations. And I could now also go into newspaper. For example, Conti today, the new headquarters of Conti, Amovio, has been completely gutted, and they are now converting empty offices to server farms. In the town Waiblingen, that's 50 minutes drive, there is a core Bosch factory of the region, you know, like one of the original 5, and it's shut down by the end of this year. So they had to fight for 2 years. This is a very symbolic factory shutdown and destruction, as this is for the region the sign of the, you know, like now it's getting into the bone. We're not closing down, we are not slowing down. This is like a deindustrialization of Stuttgart area. And you have the same thing happening in London, Paris, Rome, Milan. So wherever you have these industrial clusters, they have been contracting the headquarters, they have been contracting the local suppliers, they have been contracting the remote regional offices, but they have gutted now also the competence center and development center around the CEE. It is a double squeeze. So 2 books that I really encourage everybody to read. First is Selling Outsourcing Services. That opened my eye. In the past, what you had was big conglomerates, internationalists, but also small companies having regional ties. So it means you open up a center in a region, and then local SMEs would provide services. from food to catering, but also obviously to engineering. And over the years, it was a landscape that was very scattered and very fragmented. So meaning that larger corporations would have with the same company 2, 3, 4, 5, a dozen contracts with different economics and different points. And that brought in procurement, and procurement got centralized. And that is the big takeaway that you have to do. So if the Romanian center today is searching for a new project, it has a black book of names that it can call that normally provide them with project work. But because in the last 3 years especially, procurement was centralized, they get this double feedback. First of all, oh, we are interested. Yes, we want the work. So this is what I always hear from those managers. And on the flip side, they're not signing the contracts because procurement has now preferred vendors are coming out of India, coming out of America. Those are like 100,000 people plus companies now teaming up with somebody like Bosch, Siemens, BMW, all the big brands that you know. And those buy engineering service now in the thousands of people. Like I sit in a room where they discussed this new vendor agreement. And they said, like, now we have access to 25,000 developers. And if we want to spool up 200, 300, 400 developers in a month, we can do that. So this is a completely new game. Okay, so then you niche down. You think about technology, right? The competence center developed over a decade has engineering capabilities. And this is where venture clienting comes in. So venture clienting is a new approach, and it's an antidote to engineering contracts. So you're not buying the person, you're not buying the time, you're buying the product or technology directly. Mostly now associated with startups, it means that the complete risk of pre-development that was outsourced to nearshoring centers or offshoring centers is now completely off the books. You have a bunch of people doing on their own dime a development of a technology, developing into a proof of concept, and then you buy out the company. Now, on the one side, 100,000 plus companies taking out all the contracting for engineering, and the reduction of engineering as now venture client is this new way of getting technology, leaves Romanian companies stranded, and German companies completely destruct. So in Germany, we have small companies all over the regions, and they're completely getting booted now by this industrial change. And because they are getting booted and going Chapter 11, they now have far less projects going into the CEE. There's a counter argument to my idea. And that is like, all right, Thomas, very easy if you say you have this professionalization of procurement, we just go big. Romania has 250,000 people working in tech. There are layoffs. And now we are just building the 𝘂𝘃 of Romania. 70 to 120,000 people, all combined in one mega Romanian company. That would get you on global scale. With that, the black books that everybody of those 100,000 people has would be active again, and they would get through procurement. In a sense, like they would sit down now with Bosch, Siemens, Ford, whoever, and they just can renegotiate contracts that are out of scope currently. But there's a problem. If you hire 50,000, it would have happened. So for example, as Conti shut down 700 people in Timișoara, you would have noticed in the industry or in the newspapers that they would have bought out. Like somebody would have swooped in and would have taken the whole center. And if you go down this path, you need to invest roughly 3 billion euros. So those 3 billion euros would give you a utilization of less than 50% for 2 years to renegotiate the contracts, because on this global scale, you need to negotiate 1 or 2 years. And you don't see that. And there's a second counterpoint, and that is Germany. So Germany 6 years ago was at a similar point, different circumstances, where we would have done a big German globalist. Instead, we today have still Altin, Ferschau, Bertrand, Brunel, and others, all in the size of like a couple of thousands of people, but nobody is getting close to 100,000, not even to 50,000. So they are now outscaled by the big global companies, and they missed the opportunity. And as their contracts ran out, they don't have now the money to pool and come together. So if you think that this is a normal slowdown, the offices are empty. You can go everywhere. You can go to your black books. You can check your companies that you know, and you can just go by companies that you know and where they are at, what they are shutting down. If you're now saying, okay, we will double down, Romania is known to be an outsourcing, hub, world renowned, that is true. But the counter argument here is like, yeah, for that game you need 3 billion. The German industry didn't do it. Do you think that development center that gets now shut down has the nerve to come together with 5, 10 other development centers? That's difficult to say. My proposal is that we will see the so-called hidden champions. I worked in 2 hidden champions. I saw the hidden champions getting, from the 1970s till today, dominant on global scale. So you have the SMEs, 100%. And from that, you niche down as a company. You focus on one individual market. You focus in that market on one technology. You go deep down. You do the patents. You do the research papers. And then you get very good at the process. You get very capital efficient. You have a strong risk and compliance, and you do the continuous innovations. And roughly 0.5% of the SMEs are becoming then a hidden champion. In regional niche that you probably never heard of, dominating a certain element of a market, high margins, deep customer integrations. There are 3 elements that I want to show now why I think that a hidden champion is a valid thing. The 4th one is look at Poland, look at Germany. Like it has helped to stabilize the communities for more than 3 decades. And it's now the springboard for Poland to be, from a GDP point, wealthier than England. Like, just think about it. In 2 years, Poland, from a GDP point, will be more wealthy than Great Britain. And Polish founders and owners are currently buying out France, Spain, Italy, and British companies. The first point is, as a development center and as an outsourcing agency, there is a huge technical debt with the people. When I first got contacted with my development center, it astonished me how good the lead developers were, how discipline was there. So those people could work on tickets, but they also understood risk management, change management. It is ingrained in risk and compliance integrity. The best quality people that I met in my career are Romanians in development centers. And they are very capital efficient, to the detriment that they didn't do the necessary investment when life was good, and now in the downturn, they are hit by it. What they don't have is obviously a market focus and their ability to contact people, customers. The second point now is like, why now? And I think this label made in Romania will become world famous within the decade. So as we discussed, we have 200,000 plus people with deep technical talent. And sure, there are the juniors, sure, there are the people that are in tech to grab for money, but nevertheless, compared to other, the technical understanding is tremendous. There is real execution experience. When I met those people, there were like 5 core people that wanted to build a company, and they put in the 60, 70 hours a week to really build out that development center and really highlight how good they were. So there is real system knowledge. If you go around, and that is also, again, hinting at Plan D, if a competence center gets shut down, the technology lies more or less with the leads, with the project managers. So when you can get those people together, you already have a technology, and it's only about productization of that technology. And this is where Made in Romania comes. That technology understanding put into a product would now be sellable on the emerging markets. Romania is almost a neutral country. It's in the EU and NATO, meaning that from a point of view, the Americans, the Britons, the Spain, they can go and they don't have those problems working with them on a compliance point of view. On a point of view, if the globalization fractures, Romania is on the inside of the West. It's politically stable. I know the last presidential elections were a bit turbulent, but it is very much integrated into Europe. And the emerging markets now really like that because it's not a power player. I can have my dreams how big the country Romania will be, but that Romania becomes an imperialistic entity, invading other countries, let's say it's at least 100 years out. So if you now buy a Romanian first product and integrate it into your resilient infrastructure, you can be sure that there's no power country games happening with your infrastructure. And that is really a point that a lot need to understand, that yes, German markets, Spain, American markets to a point are saturated. Everybody has its big player. But those big players are too costly to go to the emerging markets. That's why they had in the first place the development centers in the CEE as a cost measure. That's why they are now going to India as a cost measure. So this cost is already priced in our advantage. And you can now go into this mid-priced, reliable, political, secure technology, and you can now stand on your own against China, which also presses into this mid-priced countries market. But there's a lot of, ambitions behind China. We clearly can say that the Chinese have a much more imperial stand than Romania in the world. So this is the point, why Romania, why now? Because there is a technology, there is a market that is emerging that wants that technology, it just needs to be packaged and stamped on Made in Romania. And the next thing is, there's a crisis happening in Romania, same as in Germany in the 90s. At that time, it was the sick man of Europe. Globalization opens up. Today it closes down. High labor cost, strong industrial clusters, cost advantage in the EU, and emerging tech clusters in inclusion. So you can see that from this point of view, with this pressure now going on, similar pressures, different context on the SMEs that generated the hidden champions, that forced them to not be a generalist, but niche down. Similar pressures now in Romania can now generate the next generation or different kind of hidden champions. The idea of hidden champions is just very much unknown. When I talk to people, they say we will fight to keep the business model that we have, or we will pivot and become the next unicorn startup glory, or they become a standard company and Romania may be area size from a market. But this hidden champion strategy with like filtering down your abilities and restricting you at the same time leveling up your capabilities is pretty much unheard of. And when you compare the current market situations, it has its standing. So how do we operate Plan D? Again, Plan D is this idea that we are currently in an environment that will not adapt, and we can hope A, B, C to stay in that environment, or we struggle on our own. Sure, we can now go and be a startup, get funded from the EU, and become the next unicorn, or we can be realistic and say, like, the only thing that we actually need to change is build to spec. Like every Romanian developer can, on high quality, build to spec. Give them a requirement, give them validation, and the product will be 100%. We need to add the capability build to market. That's it. So you need to add a couple of more functions and roles to the company. First of all, product exploration. Product exploration is this ability to not lock in. Second, what we need is customer development. So if you are not getting requirements now from the HQ, you need to write your own requirements. And the only place to write requirements is at the customer site or at the customer. One founder out of the US that is always touted as the best example, for 4 months followed mothers shopping. So he would come in the morning at 9 o'clock, they would go to the supermarket, they would shop, and he would just sit there and write down stuff. They would go home, they would have a tea, they would unpack the shop, he would help with unpacking, and that would leave. And he would do nothing else for 4 months, 5 months. And then he invented Groupon. Because he saw this problem of the mothers with all the jobs that they had to collect discount codes. And that was his insight after 4 months. So that is customer development. And you already are there halfway because the competence centers, have a technology core that you should keep. Like if you lose a technology core, then you're at zero. So customer development is a necessity to write requirements where they are created at the customer. And then last but not least is productize the core technology. You all have WhatsApp groups, you all meet. It is amazing how lucid and fluid the community is of developers. Touch a developer in Timișoara and go to Bucharest a week later and people will talk about you. That is what I experienced, even though it's different companies. So to say now that is an unburdened request to go out, connect to people and find this common core technology. And now with AI, you can do market research. What technologies do the emerging internet providers in Africa need? What technologies do the African or Southeast Asian power suppliers need? And based on that, or how do you make sure that infrastructure is now defensible 24/7? There are so many opportunities and so many core technologies now in the hands of a lot of developers that you can put together very fast, very fluent, this productized core technology. And that is pretty much the operation of our Plan D. Start with product exploration, reduce the amount of your processes rigidity. Build to market means customer development, writing requirements at the customer, and then find a core technology with people that you know and productize them in a package. There's one more thing. We are opening up now to the questions. Before you leave in 20 minutes, or how long the Q&A goes, it would be nice if you can leave a short review of this call. What can we do better? Because again, customer development for us means we need to ask those that are here today how they liked it, what can we improve, and what we would ask like a favorable review so other people can judge if this was worth their time or not.